welcome to Served Up. This podcast is where hospitality meets leadership and where we take an honest look at the business of beverage. I'm Bridget Albert. I've spent my career building cocktail programs, mentoring rising talent, judging competitions, and advocating for women in our industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Eric Heemer, one of only 5 people in the world to hold both the Master Sommelier and Master of Wine titles. His depth of knowledge and global perspective brings tremendous insight to every conversation. This is Served Up. Hey y'all, it's Bridget here. In this conversation, Paul Clarke shares his journey into drinks journalism, tracing how curiosity and a passion for storytelling shaped his career. He reflects on the experiences and travels that have allowed him to explore beverage culture and hospitality from around the world. Paul shares the trends, innovations, and traditions that continue to inspire him, highlighting the connections between people, places, and the drinks they craft. Throughout this conversation, his continuous curiosity and dedication to understanding global hospitality shine as the driving forces behind his work. So sit back, relax, grab yourself your favorite cocktail, and enjoy the show. Paul, welcome to Served Up. I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
It is so good to be here, Bridget. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's start at the beginning, Paul. What were you doing before drinks writing? And what was the moment, right, when you actually realized that beverage could be your lane?
You know, I came upon this almost totally by accident. I'd gone through a career change. I worked in the nonprofit sector all through my 20s. Rewarding work, great work, burned out. And so I kind of pivoted into journalism at that point. And I was just starting to freelance for different magazines, different publications. And I also had, a part-time job as just an assistant editor at a local magazine here in Seattle. And as with any writer, you're kind of like looking for what direction do I want to go? What kind of category, what kind of subject area do I really want to spend the rest of my life and the rest of my career exploring? And, you kind of dabble in lots of different things over time. And at one point I started venturing down the food writing direction. But that's, it seemed like the on-ramp was pretty steep because there are a lot of people doing food writing and I wasn't quite sure exactly how to break in. Wine writing didn't really interest me much at all, honestly. But again, it was also like a very challenging way to break in. And this was right around 2003 that we're talking about. And so I was just kind of poking around online and poking around in different newspapers and magazines and came across there used to be a column in the New York Times every Sunday or every other Sunday as part of their living or lifestyle section where they would feature a cocktail. And, William Grimes had done this back in the day. And at the time that I came across it, I think it was William Hamilton who was writing the cocktail column. And for whatever reason, I read the column, thought that's great writing, very engaging. Plus, I knew very little, almost nothing about cocktails. So I thought, well, what the hell? I can make one of these for a dinner party, put it together. Everybody liked it. And, it was like the clouds parted and the light came down. Like, hey, maybe there's something to this. I poked around a little bit more. And just within the course of like a week or 10 days, I came across if you recall, going back way back in time, the Drink Boy Forum, which was Robert Hess was running that, which had a number of different bartenders from around the world.
Yes.
And this was like the kind of like early gestational years of the cocktail renaissance. Mm-hmm. Came across that, and you have folks like Audrey Saunders and Toby Maloney and folks like that were participating in this. Came across E-Gullet, which was very much the same thing. You had a lot more home enthusiasts on E-Gullet. But you had folks like Martin Duderoff, and Ted Hay, Dr. Cocktail, all kind of participating in these early kind of stage conversations about what we came to refer to as the cocktail renaissance. And that just grabbed me. And, I poked around and there was some great writing about cocktails. William Grimes, I mentioned earlier, I picked up Dave Wondrich, back then and thought, this is exactly what I want to do. It seemed like a challenge because, at the time, most magazines and newspapers, the only time they'd really run any kind of cocktail coverage was you'd have some kind of obligatory thing right around the holidays, for like how to do a punch or an eggnog or something like that. You might have something in the summertime, like how to make a cool, refreshing drink. But the rest of the time, they just completely ignored cocktails and mixed drinks. And I thought, I see this thing going on online where we see these dedicated bartenders in London and New York and San Francisco and Hamburg and Berlin who are really excited about cocktails. But you see this kind of dearth of coverage in the mainstream media. And I thought, there's a story that's missing here. And there's a story that needs to be told. And so really it was just kind of dumb luck. My timing was just kind of perfect that I decided why I wanted to do this as everything was starting to come together. And in the course of time, it took me, probably about 2 years to really kind of get everything up and running, to do my own research so that I would know what I was talking about, but also to develop, a portfolio, which was challenging because, as I said, nobody's really hiring. So back in the day, as I started a blog, the Cocktail Chronicles, which was in 2005. And really, I started out with the idea of creating an online portfolio so that I could show editors, different magazines and newspapers that A, I know what I'm talking about, and B, I know how to write. And really, that was the origin story for me for getting into this.
It's really amazing because, during the time when you got started, you were really starting from scratch. Like you said, I believe, folks had already been writing about wine, for instance, forever. But that spotlight hadn't been shown on the craft of the cocktail. And you really did that. And you continue to do that in such, incredible ways. So when you walk into a bar now, years into your career, what do you notice immediately that you didn't notice from the start of your career?
Right. Well, in some ways, it's kind of like, that old story where you say, I had to walk 5 miles through the snow to get to school, uphill both ways. Kind of felt like that back in the day, back in the early 2000s, where you would go in and, if you saw a bottle of orange bitters, you'd be like, oh my God, this place they're cutting edge. They have got it together. Now I go into a cocktail bar and, it's kind of gauging which school of thought or which approach are they taking, because we can support so many different schools of thought and so many different approaches. Is this a place that's really leaning into like vermouths and amari and like really kind of going down the bittersweet rabbit hole? Or is this a place where you look at their back bar and they have this amazing selection of mezcal and agave spirits and brisilla and sotol and other Mexican spirits? Are they really kind of embracing that? Or are they really like pulling in these esoteric rums from around the world? Have they gone deep, deep down the American whiskey hole? There's so many directions that bars can go now. And, it didn't used to be that way. We didn't have this kind of embarrassment of riches in terms of the sheer amount of quality and quantity of these magnificent spirits and aperitif wines that are out there now. So it is kind of that rewarding, like, it's so much better, so much widespread than it used to be back then. But it's also going in like, okay, what does this place pride themselves on? Is there mezcal? Is there agave selection? Is this really where they're going? Let's see where they want to go with this.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is like looking into all their treasures,
Yeah.
on the back of the bar and finding out what that soul of the place is. So, the cocktail culture itself, it has evolved so much over the past decade. What changes have you felt are truly meaningful? And what changes do you feel are just maybe more cosmetic?
Right. Well, I think, let's focus first off on the product side, because I think there's several different conversations there. And like the product side is definitely one of that. And, again, going back to those early days where, if you walked in and even if it was a cutting edge craft cocktail bar and say you got a martini or you got a Manhattan, then the vermouth, it was going to be one of the mainstream brands, one of the 2 or 3 big brands that are out there. And that was fine. That was all good, well and good. But now when you go in and you see this, the wide variety of like, are they doing like French vermouths? Are they doing Italian vermouths? Are they doing like, creative contemporary vermouths? Are they going the Spanish vermouth direction? And so seeing that kind of blossoming of that. And so I think that's been worthwhile, not only in terms of flavor and choice for the consumer, but it's also giving us a better connection with these different cultures, with the culture of Spanish vermouth, with the culture of Italian vermouth, with the culture of Argentinian vermouth. Now we're getting the South American stuff. So it's giving us those flavorful aspects that are cool and delicious and fun to work with in a cocktail environment. But it's also, showing a little bit of insight into this is how the Spanish eat and drink. And this is different from the way the Italians eat and drink. And that's really kind of a cool difference to understand and really kind of, get into. I think on that note, one of the things I'm really enjoying and that I'm hoping to see more and that we are trying to drive more at Imbibe is thinking, yes, we're thinking about what's in the glass, the beautiful cocktail, the beautiful wine or the spirit that's in there. But what is the backstory to that? What is the culture that created that? And I think we're trying to emphasize that, especially with things like mezcal, with things like Mexican spirits, with things like rum as well, because each production area, each place where this is made brings their own kind of culture and history and character to it. And it's important for us as consumers and as professionals in the industry to really understand that so that we can show the appropriate amount of respect for it. It's one thing to absolutely love mezcal and love mezcal cocktails, but we need to understand the significance of mezcal in Oaxaca. We need to understand the significance of mezcal in the communities that make it, and the purposes that they make it, the ways that they consume it, the ways that they celebrate with it, and it's all kind of a way of giving it the respect it deserves and giving those people and those communities the respect that they deserve.
My gosh, 100%. I mean, think about, there was a time when mezcal was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was considered that cheap bottle with perhaps like a worm in the bottom, right?
Exactly. It always kind of looks sketchy. Like, the label looks like it hadn't been redesigned since 1957. And I remember, like, in college, it was like, we got mezcal. Like, if you want to get dangerous, we have mezcal. And, it wasn't until the mid 2000s that really started to change. And, I was going back and thinking about this because 2026 is Imbibe's 20th anniversary year. Our very first issue that came out was May and June of 2006. And one of the features in that inaugural issue was on Oaxaca. And like going back to that, looking at that, thinking, man, nobody, even people in the industry, nobody knew anything about mezcal. I mean, there were a couple of folks, you had Steve Olson, you had Ron Cooper, and they were like starting to spread the word. But really, you can count them on your fingers, the number of people who were really, being enthusiastic and being boosters of mezcal. And that's changed so much in the past 20 years. So it is one of those categories where, like you said, nobody really knew about this at the time. And there's so many things within our drinks world that were like that now we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, we absolutely do. You just mentioned Imbibe, which I do want to dive into. Can you tell our listeners, first of all, what Imbibe is?
Sure. So Imbibe is a magazine. We start first and foremost ink and paper. We're old school. We're print forward. Of course, we have a digital presence. We have a website with tons of recipes and stories online. We have a podcast. Excuse me, I should say our award-winning Radio Imbibe podcast.
Yes, congratulations on this.
Thank you.
Yes.
I brought the glass plate home from New Orleans from the Spirited Awards. I got to talk it up. We of course have our social media channels on Instagram, Pinterest, Threads, and Facebook. But first and foremost, at the end of the day, we are a print magazine, ink and paper, and we love going old school like that because I think at the time when we started out in 2006. It was crazy to launch a new publication, especially a new independent publication and a new independent publication focusing on an aspect of the world that nobody else was really covering. I mean, there were some trade magazines, but it was all, that's more for business,
right?
Or for specialists and collectors of whiskeys and things like that. We are a consumer magazine. You can buy Imbibe in the grocery store or in bookstores. And I like to remind people of that when I'm talking to them for the magazine. I like to remind sources of that because it means we always need to be thinking about this drinks world in terms of people who are completely unfamiliar with it. We can never take for granted that everybody knows what an old fashioned is or everybody knows the difference between tequila and mezcal. We always need to be bringing new people into that conversation. And that is very much a part of our mission. Yes, we have a very enthusiastic readership among the trade for which we are immensely grateful. I mean, it means so much to me to go to an event like Tales of the Cocktail or Bar Convent in Berlin and have folks recognize what we do and say, I learned something from the magazine. We use it at our bar now, and where we picked up a recipe or a technique or what have you, and we use that now with our customers. That means so much to me because it means we're resonating on that kind of professional level and we're bringing some value to bartenders and bar owners and sommeliers and cafe owners and baristas around the world. But first and foremost, we need to keep the consumers in mind. We always need to be bringing new people into the conversation. So we always need to remember that we have new people coming into the conversation. So we can't over geek it too much. We want to bring specialized things and introduce people things and introduce bartenders to things that maybe they don't know about or share some different kind of perspective on it. But we need to remember that we still need to bring new people into that conversation. So that's the bridge that we have to think about in every single thing that we do. And I think it helps keep us humble, but also it helps keep bringing more people into your bars.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, it's such a great tool for all of us in the beverage world and for those who are curious, right? about Beverage itself.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. When you first started writing for Imbibe, can you tell us what kind of stories would just get you so excited to write?
Right.
And maybe how that has changed over the years?
Right. Well, the very first piece I wrote for Imbibe was for that inaugural issue in 2006. And I wrote a profile of Ted Hay, of Dr. Cocktail. And I was really excited to do that because, all the cocktail nerds online knew who Dr. Cocktail was. But the rest of the world out there really needed to be exposed to what he was doing. Because at the time, and again, we got to do some time travel here. His book came out, Vintage Spirits and Forgotten Cocktails, came out in 2004, if I'm remembering
Yeah, I think
correctly.
it did. Yep.
Yeah. And, for a lot of us, that was, if you've ever made a Corpse Reviver #2 in your life, you learn about it because of that book. If you've ever made a Boulevardier, you learned about it from Ted Hay's work. And the contributions he made early on to the cocktail world, we still feel them today. And I think, he hasn't been active in the cocktail space recently, so maybe some folks aren't as familiar with his name, but back in 2004, he was doing this magnificent, impactful work. And so, for our very first issue of the magazine, I wanted to introduce him to our audience and say, you may have heard of him, maybe you have his book, but you need to know about him, how he got there and what excites him about this. Stories like that, or I think the second piece I ever wrote for Imbibe, I wrote about vermouth. And I thought, okay, it's getting nerdy because even then, we're like, vermouth, really? Are people going to get excited about that? Like, no, really, vermouth is so cool.
Did you make vermouth cool?
I can't take credit for that, but I'm not going to say I'm not responsible for it. But it's always been, something like trying to pick off those things that maybe we've heard of, we'd heard of mezcal, but you didn't really know mezcal. And so that's been part of our goal from day one is trying to bring those things in. And, initially when I started at Imbibe, I was starting as a freelance writer. I wasn't on staff and I was writing for a bunch of other publications and websites and so on at the time, which was great because it gave me lots of experience with different editors and different subject areas and really kind of helped me figure out cocktails and the spirits world. And then I came on fully on staff starting in early 2014. But I've been a part of Imbibe since issue #1 and have contributed to almost every single issue that we've done.
Congratulations on that, because now that was 2006. I mean, so you're going on 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. And, we're thinking about it in a lot of ways, coming into our anniversary year. And of course, we're having this conversation in February. So we've already kind of put some wheels in motion. And if I can talk about one thing that we just did, or it's in our current issue, and it's part of our 20th anniversary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Observation. So our January-February issue, if folks are familiar with Imbibe at all, then you may have heard of the Imbibe 75. And that's something that we always publish in our January issue. And it's an introduction to our readership of people and places that we think are going to be changing the way that we drink in the months and years ahead. Historically, we'd always focused primarily on North America because that's largely where our readership is, and a lot of the bars, a lot of the bartenders and cafes and baristas and so on that we work with. For our 20th anniversary year, we wanted to recognize all of these friends and readers and enthusiasts that we've run into over the years around the world. And so we turned our Imbibe 75 for 2026 into a global Imbibe 75. So
that's amazing. How exciting.
Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure we featured bartenders from Africa. We want cocktail bars in Australia, great sake producers in Japan. We wanted to, recognize some of the folks doing winemakers in Poland, a coffee maker in Brazil, people who are doing this magnificent work all around the world, doing cool stuff that contributes to our overall conversation and our overall understanding of the drinks world, and bring them into that. And it was also, recognizing them, but also we wanted to make sure that we were, making a place for ourselves globally. We know we have this audience in the United States, and some in Canada and Mexico as well. But we wanted to make sure that folks in the UK, folks in France, folks in Australia recognize our brand, who we are, what we bring to the conversation, and that we've been doing this for 20 years. And we want them to be a part of this conversation moving forward and really kind of make Imbibe more into this kind of globally recognized name and brand.
Yeah, I believe in so many ways that it already is. So, but to make it more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible.
I mean, one of the highlights for me, it just came last week. We featured two folks in this Imbibe 75, and they are distillers. They're a couple in Kiev in Ukraine, and they launched a craft distillery in Ukraine just before the Russian invasion. And so, of course, they had put everything on pause while he went to fight the Russians for a year. But they're making this, this bespoke, historically rooted Ukrainian spirit in Ukraine, and trying to say, vodka is not Ukrainian. This is a spirit from Ukraine. This is why you need to understand this and our culture and our people and what it means. And so just last week, he put on an Instagram reel. I don't understand what he was saying because he was speaking Ukrainian, but he was very enthusiastic, apparently, about being an Imbibe. And that just, warmed the cockles of my heart to see that. I was really happy to see that we are getting that kind of recognition and making those kinds of impressions, those kinds of friends worldwide.
Yeah, I love that. And that just enriches your readership, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, me as a reader to go in and see something so unique, right? And hear that story that's so different that I probably would not hear anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And making that a priority for ourselves. I mean, moving forward, we're still recognizing our core audience is in North America. And so, we're still writing very much with that approach in mind, but reminding ourselves as we go, as we're looking for cocktail recipes, if we're looking for winemakers or distillers, making sure that we're thinking more globally about the folks that we're reaching out to and the stories that we're sharing.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm excited to see, what's to come.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It's super cool. Is there like a particular story or even reporting experience that shifted how you think about spirits and cocktails, not just professionally, but personally?
I want to say almost every time I do a deep dive into a spirit, it shifts my thinking about it in some ways. And especially and you can probably relate to this because, you've been working in the industry for a long time as well. When you do anything for 20 or more than 20 years, even if it's something fascinating and magnificent and engaging, it can still, you can get jaded. You can just be like, okay, I've tasted everything. I've done everything. Yeah. Don't tell me about this again. But having the blinders kind of pulled off, or like tasting something or talking to somebody or visiting a distillery or visiting a particular place that really understands what they're doing can give you that energy again. And so one thing that we do every year and that we've done for a number of years now at Imbibe is in our March issue, we always do a deep dive into some particular spirit or cocktail ingredient. So, for example, last year we did Irish whiskey. A couple of years ago, we did vermouth, and we've done gin, we've done rye whiskey and so on in the past. And I think for me, these are things I've been working with for many years, but the kind of the benefit for me of venturing into these deep dives, these big package features, is it kind of forces me to think primarily about this spirit for a number of months. And to ask myself, okay, so we've written about rye whiskey before because I wrote that feature in 2007. How do we revisit that in light of where we are now? And what is still exciting about it? How do we still bring people in with the basics? But then what is genuinely inspiring? What's genuinely exciting? What is genuinely creative about the spirit right now? What do we want to share with our readers? So it kind of forces me to rethink that of like, what excites me? What can I get into it? Are we looking at, to use that rye whiskey example, are we looking at distillers that are using different varieties of rye, historic varieties of rye that it may use? Are we talking to somebody like Todd Leopold at Leopold Brothers, who commissioned this entire historic type of still to make an historic style of rye whiskey? Who are doing really cool things in this, and how can we share this with our audience? But also, how does that continue to excite me in the work that's going on out there? So, you asked if there's a particular story that excites me. I want to say, I make sure that I try to preserve something or put something on the calendar for myself every year that will challenge me to go back and take something that I thought I knew, that I thought I understood, and force me to reevaluate and kind of start over from square one and rethink that entire category. Because for me, I come out of it energized and I come excited. I've talked to people who are doing amazing things, and I think, 20 years ago, I never would have imagined somebody would have been doing that. Now, here they are, and it's delicious and it's amazing, and they're doing it with quality and integrity, and I love it.
I love that for you. And I love that you want to continue to challenge yourself even after being with Imbibe for 20 years. It would be so easy, right? Just sit comfortably in that bathwater and just
just kind of keep it going, like on the hamster wheel. And, but that's no fun.
No, I think that's such great advice too, for anybody in any career to continue to challenge themselves, right? To keep their minds fresh. Something that you do that I think is really interesting and so challenging is writing about cocktails and spirits. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to kid you, because you have to write and capture about taste, texture, atmosphere, all of it. And that is so different than writing, let's say, when you write about a bartender or a bar itself or a barman or whatever, a physical person, right? And so what are some of the biggest challenges really turning that sensory experience into an article?
Right. Well, I mean, to your point, yes, it is much easier in some ways to talk about people. And we always need to remind ourselves every cocktail, every spirit, every wine is ultimately about people and the people who made it. With that said, when you're writing about cocktails, it's challenging to not, just do the same thing over and over. So, which I do run into that sometimes. I mean, we created and we sponsor Negroni Week every year. So I have to write about Negronis at some point every year. Like, okay, I've done Negroni so many times. How do I write about a Negroni again? And it's that whole kind of thing, like pushing yourself. Okay, so I've done, you've written about bitter. Okay, think about something that's not bitter. What are some other characters or properties? What's another kind of framework to think about the Negroni? So it's kind of pushing myself into different directions of, how can I write it so I'm not bored? Because as I started off, I found cocktail writing exciting. That's what brought me into this world in the first place. How do I continue to make this exciting? I think if you're right, I continue to find cocktails and spirits just fascinating, fascinating culinary inventions, fascinating intersections of biology and technology, human ingenuity comes into play. And so it's such a dynamic kind of world that if I write about it and I make it boring, then I've really done it a disservice. So I challenge myself, how can I continue to make this interesting? Even if it's something I've done a million times, like the Negroni or like a martini, how do I come at this framing in a way that continues to make it exciting? Because I think it also helps that even though I've written about these things many times, it helps that I still like them. I still love a good martini. I love a great Negroni. So what is it that continues to excite me, even though I've had countless Negronis in my life? What is it about this particular Negroni in the glass in front of me right now that I'm enjoying or I'm not enjoying? What is detracting from that experience? And then sharing that, because, we're all kind of in the same boat in some ways. We're all coming at it from different directions, but ultimately we're all at the bar together. We're all having cocktails together, figuratively speaking. And so what continues to bring us in that makes it so magic and keeps us coming back? And so asking myself those questions and then trying to share that with the reader.
Yeah, I think that's where your magic happens. I do, because you have a true love for what you do. And like you just said, you enjoy going to the bars. You still love having a martini. It's not old to you yet, right? It's not like been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there are some things, like over the course of the years, there are some things where, you see a menu or a cocktail lands in front of you, and in your head, you might think, oh God, this again. Because there are things that, that we've leaned into. And when I say we, I mean, the bar world has leaned into trends and fashions as much as any other kind of part of life.
Industry,
and so,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, they're cocktail styles or cocktail flavors or ingredients that have come and gone over the years. And, there's a time when absolutely everything had elderflower in it, and then elderflower went away. Now we're seeing elderflower coming back. And now it's been so long since I've been inundated with like, oh, I actually kind of enjoy the flavor, but when it was in every single cocktail that was coming at you for a while, it was a little bit overwhelming. But I think, for the most part, and especially for me, I think my passion for cocktails started with craft cocktails and with the vintage cocktails, historic cocktails, those kind of simple flavor combinations, 2, 3, 4 ingredient cocktails. They were, relatively easy to put together, but what it really came down to the ingredients and the quality of the ingredients that were going into them. And that's the way my tastes still range. I mean, I love a creative cocktail. I love one that's, where they have a whole lab downstairs and they've done great stuff with the rotovap that's coming into the cocktail. Those can be magnificent, but at the end of the day, the ones that still appeal to me that I keep coming back to are going to be the martini, the daiquiri, the Negroni, the Manhattan, the things that I've had tons of times, but it's also, they're simple, they're reliable, but you can still express your creativity and the creativity of the distiller through those cocktails. And that's what still engages me.
Yeah. Well, some bars are still using, like store-bought mixes. That are artificial. And so when you write about using even just fresh lemon juice, or when they try those 3 ingredient recipes for the first time, it's like Oprah says, it's a freaking aha moment.
Yeah, exactly.
For a lot of folks still today.
Yeah. And, I remember about 10 years ago, I was doing some events here in Seattle. And it was when I had a book come out in 2015, and I was, doing book events. And I had this room full of people who came in, and we're going to talk about cocktails. And at first I thought, I really need to come up with some seriously intense and kind of geeky cocktails for people because we want to be engaged and, what's the cutting edge conversation. And at one point when I was talking, I mentioned the old fashioned, and just like I saw this just kind of blank look on some people's faces. I was like, how many folks in this room have made an old fashioned, have made an old fashioned yourself at home? And it was a room full of maybe 25, 30 people, and only like 4 hands went up. I like, oh my God, I am about to blow your minds. And I still love doing that. I love doing consumer events sometimes for that very reason, because there are things, cocktails that we take for granted working within the industry. Like, oh my God, everybody knows how to do a Manhattan. Are we done with the daiquiri conversation yet? But then you go to this consumer audience who may be new to this, or maybe they've only dabbled in a couple of things, and the only daiquiri they've ever had has been, out of that frozen drink machine in New Orleans. And like, okay, you know what? I'm going to blow your mind right now, because this is going to have 3 ingredients in it. You can make it at home with no thought whatsoever, and it's going to change your life or change your entertaining life. And, they have such a blast about it. And I enjoy that because it gives me that, sense of sharing this kind of information again, it's always reinvigorating to me to kind of like bring somebody else on board.
Absolutely. And you think about it, we create cocktails, not just for ourselves, but typically for the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think, coming back to these methods of simplicity, I think, also, so my local bar that I hang out here in Seattle is called the Doctor's Office. And really, I jokingly refer to it as the old bartender's bar, because there have been old bartenders working, guys I've known or folks I've known for the better part of the last 20 years. And it's always kind of, we can go in and we can kind of like commiserate, like, hey, you remember when this product first came out and everybody lost their damn minds for it. And so it's kind of that memory lane aspect, but it's also sharing, how some of these very simple foundational cocktails, or some of the more esoteric, vintage classic cocktails, when we first came across them years ago, like, oh, that's really cool. I need to introduce more people to the Tailspin or to, the Deschler cocktail. And then you'll have guests who come in who may still be fairly new in their own cocktail explorations, or other bartenders who come in who may still be fairly new to the industry and they've never heard of these cocktails. Like, okay, you know what? 3 ingredients, I'm going to blow your mind. And so easy, so simple. And, it's the kind of thing where you're getting crushed on a Friday night. Somebody asks for something new. You don't want to have to, think of some, newfangled thing that you can do on the fly. Here is a classic vintage cocktail that nobody's made since, 2012. And guests are going to go, that's delicious. What is it? Like, it's a Deschler. It's a classic cocktail, and it's going to blow your mind. So I think kind of like bringing not only new guests into it, but recognizing like some of the younger bartenders coming into the scene now. We're having these trainings where you're trained on the house drinks, on the house cocktails. That's fantastic, because you're getting introductions to different kinds of techniques and different kinds of products that we just didn't have access to 20 years ago. But I think we're still kind of like sometimes missing the classics. We're skipping over the basics, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so it's that whole kind of aspect of like understanding the basics of why does a Negroni work? Why does a Manhattan work? And think about some of those relatives of those cocktails where there's very simple variations on these themes that are really useful to have in your back pocket, because they can be the starting point for your own creativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I love that you brought up like your local watering hole. I do have a couple places here. I live in a very small town called Shorewood, Illinois. We don't have a high school or a hospital. We do have a couple bars. Okay. So I love to go up to Mauve, which is considered like a craft cocktail bar, which is unheard of in these parts. Unfreaking heard of, right? And I love to go to this other place that's called Iron and Glass. And there couldn't be more different. They couldn't be more freaking different, right? I know when I go to Iron and Glass, I'm going to most likely want to have a beer there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can tell you the last time that I went, I thought it was so cool. The bartenders were so excited that they had created their own Bloody Mary mix and they're trying different base spirits. And when they were trying out, which I'm not a fan of even being from Illinois, is Malort, but they're all over it. Right. But then the conversations that we start having about the original Bloody Mary when I'm sitting there, right. That they didn't even know or understand because they've been using like Mr. T's mix forever, whatever it was. And so even with just those simple classics, it's so fun, I think, to see when bartenders really dive in and create something new and cool that they're excited and they're excited to tell you about. But I do want to talk about the local experience versus, when we go into the really fancy cocktail bars, right? When you're expected to have maybe even a beautiful square little white linen napkin or whatever doily, put in front of you and making sure you have that water. You're not having to ask, right? Or having to tell the bartender how to make something or just ordering a beer because you just give up.
Right.
Sure what the hell to order.
I'm not going to decipher this menu you put in front of me.
Yes. Forget it. But I do think that there's something so special that we don't talk about enough with just our local bars that will never be in Imbibe Magazine. They'll never get a Spirit Award, right? But there's something just so incredibly special to have where you can walk in almost like Cheers. People know who you are. You know the bartenders' names. If they have a jukebox, you know what songs you're going to play and annoy everybody in the bar, right?
Right.
Can we talk about just how very special that experience still is?
Absolutely. And I think I want to challenge one thing you just said, where they may never get a Spirited Award, but I wouldn't say they'd never be in Imbibe Magazine, because we try to take those into account as well. And like, if there's a neighborhood bar that's doing something cool, it doesn't have to be like, the most creative cocktail out there, but if they're doing something solid that's delicious and it's good and expressive and their clientele like it, we want to know about it. Because if it's, if it hits the right chords for us, yeah, absolutely. We love including stuff like that.
I love that you just said that. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Several years ago, we actually made this a priority for ourselves. And I'm trying to remember the rationale why we did this. But for an entire year, I want to say it was maybe 2017. I might be misremembering that, but I think it was 2017. We decided we're going to highlight local bars, neighborhood bars, over the course of the year. And we did that in several different ways. We have a back page section in every issue of the magazine called Quench. It's a personal essay. And we said, I'm going to hire writers from around the country to write about a neighborhood bar that they love. Not a craft cocktail bar, not a highfalutin place, but a neighborhood bar. Like Dave Wondrich wrote about a place in Brooklyn that he loved. Robert Simonson wrote about a Wisconsin supper club that he loved to go to. And just these kind of neighborhood places where, like you say, they're never going to be, maybe never be on the national radar, or have a huge Instagram following. But, the people who go there every week or several times a week, and they absolutely love it. It's a part of their lives. So we wanted to recognize that. And in addition to that, we also ran a feature on neighborhood bars and kind of the new age of neighborhood bars. We are in a transitional moment. And I think maybe we're always in a transitional moment with our cities and our culture where, we're facing the demise of the dive bar or fewer dive bars. They're going away and they're not being replaced necessarily. But it's also recognizing, kind of the state of cities is always to change. Things are always changing over the years. So while we can be sad that a lot of the dive bars are going away, we need to recognize what is coming in their place. Are there places in our neighborhoods? Our neighborhoods need places where people can gather and get together and just chat, have a beer, have a cocktail, whatever. Our culture benefits from having these places around. So what does the neighborhood bar look like in 21st century America? How are places stepping into that fold and stepping up to that challenge? I'm not sure it's really happening as much as it should be, but the mere fact that we're recognizing that there's a need for it and maybe we should devote some attention and some energy to this and some value to it, then hopefully we can help kind of remedy that situation in some way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's something to say because just about the whole neighborhood bar. And I'm so excited that Imbibe has been always celebrating, right, the locals. And it's wonderful because it is a place where people will put their dollar more times than not.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think for us also, it's important to us, and this factors very much into kind of our core identity in some ways, is that we are an independent publication. I think a lot of people don't realize about Imbibe. We're tiny. There are 8 of us in the entire company. And we've been doing this for 20 years and we're doing this at a very small scale. But I think, I was born and raised in rural northeastern Oklahoma. Our publisher is from Georgia. We are based, our global headquarters is in Portland, Oregon. I say all this because I think we value smaller towns, smaller cities, smaller markets. And we love to see what people are doing that are doing it on their own. We love to see what independents are doing because we're independent as well. And we like to support other small businesses, other small independent businesses. And that includes cocktail bars. So if a place or a neighborhood bar. So if a place is independent and they've created this kind of cool niche for themselves in whatever town or city that they're in, we love to know about it. And if there's an opportunity to do something and it really, kind of fits something we're working on, I mean, it blows my mind to run a cocktail recipe from a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Bentonville, Arkansas. I mean, I went looking in Bentonville, Arkansas several years ago and we found it.
You did.
Yeah. So I love, kind of, I mean, yes, of course we love our industry friends in New York City and San Francisco and LA and Chicago and all of the major cities. But, there's something special for us to find somebody doing something really cool in a town that maybe I have to search for, I really like that because it's great to know that this kind of energy and creativity is going on everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we want to share that.
Don't even have a high school.
Yeah.
In rural America. I'm surrounded by cornfields and farms. Yeah. So,
I mean, one of the things, and I don't want to maybe overshare of our process, but, when you asked me earlier about like, what are some of the changes I've seen in cocktail bars over the past 20 years, just when you walk in the door, one of the big things is we have different businesses and different importers and companies that have really kind of like recognized a need, recognized a desire for products out there, for interesting, engaging, flavorful products. And I'm thinking, particularly of like household pens, which brings in a range of vermouths and spirits and liqueurs. And that now, one of those things, if you walk into a cocktail bar and, if I don't see any household pens products, I'm like, they're missing out. They're not hitting some of the major things. But the reason I bring them up is because something I think that's really cool about them also being a small independent business is that they recognize their market and they recognize that the smaller markets matter and the smaller markets make a difference. And so if I am stuck sometime and say, I really need a cocktail from a bar in Nebraska, I know if I reach out to that team, they will know exactly who in Nebraska is buying cool craft cocktail ingredients. And like, okay, I've got a lead now on how to trace down one of these smaller markets. So I think it brings us back to, yes, we love those guys. They do great products, but also they recognize other parts of the market that are doing really cool things. And it's useful for us to know, outside of New York City and San Francisco and Chicago, what other communities are doing cool things. Maybe, is a particular kind of product or, a particular vermouth really moving in some part of America that I never would have thought of. Well, then I need to know what's going on in that part of America.
100%. I don't know if you've ever been. Have you spent any time in Illinois significantly?
Not very much. Almost none outside of Chicago.
Oh my God. If you ever come here, I'm going to take you to the rural bars.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love that.
We'll knock your socks right off. Yeah. There's a place in very close to Ottawa, Illinois, and it's a mezcal bar.
Wow.
And it's near Starved Rock, which is a national park. It's in the middle of nowhere. And it's one of, I think, has the most beautiful mezcal tequila collections I've ever seen. I'm like, why is this here? Why is this here? I don't understand. It's like very random.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Or I remember several years ago, I was in, where was I? I was in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, that's where my daughter lives.
Yeah. And a local bartender was taking me around and said, okay, I need to take you to this place. It's very special. And I'm ashamed right now. I can't remember the name of the place that he took me, but it was a dive bar. But the owner had a very particular love of tiki drinks. So you go in, it's a dive bar. It's like any other dive bar. The beer coasters had, a phone number for a local attorney if you got pulled over for DUI on your way home.
Oh yeah.
One of those kinds of things. Yeah,
the real deal.
That's where we are. But then he's like, "Would you like a fog cutter?" He had the beautiful mugs and glassware, just out of love, and I love to see that.
Looking ahead, what are you most curious about in the drink world or beyond it that's happening today?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question because here in 2026, there's so many things going on. It's kind of hard to keep on top of everything. I mean, first off, I think the conversation that everybody's having within the industry and close to the industry now is what is going on with Gen Z in terms of their alcohol consumption. And even if they're drinking alcohol, are they going out or are they just doing this at home? So it's going back to the thing I've touched upon several times, like always trying to bring new people into the conversation and recognizing that, some people are going to age out, other people age in, and we need to make sure that we're giving them the kinds of information and then the kinds of experiences that they need to kind of bring them into that conversation. So I think, I'm optimistic about the long term. It may be bumpy getting into it, but I think ultimately people are looking to be around other people and to be out in places like bars that do great things. Also, I mean, another big part of the conversation that we're trying to look at now is what's going on the alcohol-free sector, the non-alcoholic sector. And this is both in terms of things like the NA RTDs, the ready-to-drink cocktails that are, we're increasingly seeing, and they're increasingly better quality. So that's kind of an interesting little dynamic to keep on top of. But also things like NA beer. I've been really impressed with some of the alcohol-free beers that have been coming out. There's some real, between technological achievement and creative innovation, there's some cool stuff going on there. So I'm happy to have those around. I'm happy to have them in my own fridge from time to time. But then also there's this big question mark of what's happening with THC beverages and cannabis beverages. Because that's, we can't deny that that's a part of the drinking culture nowadays in the United States. And we need to think about it and think about how this is filling in with everything else. But ultimately, I mean, when I look long term, I think people come back around to things for a reason. There's a reason that we re-embraced the cocktail in the early 2000s. There's a reason that, we rediscovered craft beer in the late 20th century. These things have flavor, they have culture, they have connection, and they bring something interesting to our lives. And I think, long term, these are going to keep coming around and around. And it's up to us to keep introducing people to this, keep introducing them to it in a quality way, in a sustainable way, and a way with integrity. And, then cross our fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah. I love your answer. I mean, there is so much room to grow, right? Because I know that times are really tough right now in beverage across the board as far as sales go and placements and all of the things, but there's definitely room to grow and there's so many different avenues. So as trying as times are, I do believe that, we'll rise above it.
Right. Absolutely. And, change is inevitable. So recognizing, that's always going to be a part of the equation and just trying to figure out where is that change happening and what parts of the tradition are always going to be there.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today on Served Up. You've been absolutely lovely and so insightful. And I was curious if you would come back again sometime as my guest.
Bridget, I would love to. It's always wonderful to talk to you, and I would take any excuse that I have.
I love it. With that said, I want to wish you just some great health and a lot of peace, Paul. Thank you so much for being my guest here on Served Up.
Thanks so much. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of our future Served Up episodes. Cheers.